Thanks for being here. Before we get started, I want to thank the Chetco Activity Center for hosting us today. I've done a number of town halls here. They've always been really accommodating, and I also understand that some in one or another of the storms that occasionally pass through, not today, that their flag was lost. So I have actually to present to Janice Scanlon a flag that was flown over the United States Capitol, just to thank them for having us here today, and also to replace the one that was lost. So there you go. Okay, let's get started. I think we'll do some very quick introductions before I make any remarks. And we have up here a number of folks, and I've got a list. But why don't you just quickly introduce yourselves so people are up here today. Go ahead.
I'm Bill McNair from the Port of Gold Beach.
Okay.
I'm Ted Fitzgerald from the Port of Brookings Harbor.
Sam Scotfield, Port of Port Orford.
Colonel John Eisenhower, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Portland District.
Jeff Cruz, I'm State Senator, Senate District 1, and Chair of the Oregon Coastal Caucus.
Hi, I'm Jeff Griffin. I'm field rep with the Governor's Office.
Great, thank you. We have some other elected officials here. I'd like them to briefly introduce themselves too, so people know everybody's here who can help us with this problem. So go ahead.
I'm Patty McEwen, representing House District 9, which goes from Coos Bay to Yachats.
And I'm Senator Roland, Senate District 5, which goes from Coos Bay to Tillamook Bay, and then into the valley and the city of Sheridan.
And I'm Deborah Boone. I represent the beautiful upper left coast of our state. Plots up in half of Tillamook and then inland to Banks and Gaston.
Great.
State Representative Krieger from the South Coast. District goes from the California border, takes in Charleston, have 5 ports.
Thanks. Okay, any other, yes?
I'm Amy Amrine, Senator Jeff Merkley's Southern Oregon Field Representative, representing from Lake County all the way over to the coast.
Great. Okay. Great. Well, thanks. Thanks for being here. The reason we're here today, in particular, why I chose to come down. I mean, this, as you've already heard, we have a representative from the North Coast. This is not just an issue for Southern Oregon coastal ports. It's not just an issue for Oregon coastal ports. We were going to have someone here representing the district to the south of mine in California. I don't know whether his staff got here. And we were also going to have someone from Crescent City, but I'm not sure whether there. Is there anyone here? Did they get? Okay.
Yeah, we've got the port manager.
Okay, right there. Go. So just so you know, this is not a one-state problem. It's not a part of a state problem. It's a bi-coastal or tri-coastal, or even more than that, because we have problems in small ports, West Coast, Gulf Coast, East Coast, and then also into the Great Lakes region where this is a problem. So what we're going to talk about here today is I'll talk from a national level about some big solutions that might or might not be possible. But the reason why we're here in particular is because when I was down here this summer, Ted and the Port of Brookings Harbor, unfortunately, because they've been hit by the tidal wave, but also fortunately because we were able to get them some federal money to help deal with the problems in rebuilding the port, had been able to rent a dredge, a truck transportable dredge, and very innovatively deal with some of their problems, and he'll talk about that in more detail. And it was just sort of one of those light bulb moments for me. And I said, no, wait a minute, this thing, you can move it around on a truck. Because we're always having the problem about, well, we're trying to bring the dredge down from the Columbia, and they run into bad weather, and they have to go in somewhere, and they've only got so many days, and then they lose the bad weather days. And then we've had years when I've actually, in the old days, when I could designate projects for dredging, when they still couldn't get here that year. So I started thinking, wow, truck transportable dredge, and how many places might this work, and how many people have this problem? And could this potentially be a model to both help the Corps of Engineers with its duties and its budgetary problems? And is it something that might be, we could either partner with the state, which is why the Coastal Caucus is here today, and the representatives from the coast. And I've talked to the governor about this issue, and that's why the governor has a representative here today. And let's see if there's something very creative that we might be able to do. And that's pretty much the discussion I want to have up here. But I'll first give sort of the 40,000 foot view of this. First off, you know, some people, the colonel has been very good. He came down to Port Orford and said some things that were very honest but very difficult for the community in terms of the potential for future dredging by the Corps. And he, nor is the region to be blamed. Ultimately, the blame would rest with Congress or the administration generally and the budget. The Corps of Engineers nationally has about a $62 billion backlog on critical projects. That's dredging, that's jetties, that's dams, that's locks. That's a whole host of things that need to be invested in, and as all of you know, there's no one who's more of an advocate for me than investing in rebuilding the nation's crumbling infrastructure, including Corps of Engineers projects and highway projects and everything else. Won't go into that now, but they're under severe budget constraints. Now, part of the problem is that we do have a revenue source to deal with harbor maintenance, which includes jetties, dredging, and other issues. And that revenue source is bringing in about $1.5 billion a year. Unfortunately, many years ago, even before I was in Congress, as long as I've been there, Congress started taking that money and using it elsewhere. Or it's sort of pretending they don't use it elsewhere, but it's part of the unified budget process. So we're spending less than $1 billion a year in a good year, and down as low as you know, a few hundreds of millions of dollars in a bad year to actually do the work. Now, 4 or 5 years ago, I proposed legislation to make the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund a real trust fund, like Social Security or like the Highway Trust Fund. The money can't be taken out and used for other purposes. That legislation was included in a bill in the House. It never became law. Last year, or the year before last, when we were doing the highway bill, it was a representative, again showing this is a national problem, Bustante, from Louisiana, Republican, had an amendment to the bill which I supported, and I'm a co-sponsor of his bill, to say we're going to make this into, he took basically the language I had had a few years before and said we're going to make this into a real trust fund. And the money that flows in will flow out, and it will be spent on this, on these needs. We couldn't get the Senate to agree to that, and it was dropped in the conference. But we're back again, and we're going to try again. So there is potential that we could increase the funding for these projects. But as I've already told you, there is a huge backlog of projects out there, and even if we get the full allocation, it doesn't immediately solve all of the Corps' problems in terms of the dredging backlog or the jetty backlog or any of those other issues. There's a second problem with that, and that is that the big ports are saying that's our money because the money is generated with the cargo coming into and out of the big ports, and some of them don't want to share. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion or a battle over, even if we are successful in turning this into a real trust fund, and there are budget implications for that. That means money can't be spent elsewhere. It means the deficit looks a little bigger on paper one way or the other, and the people on the Appropriations Committee who get to spend the money elsewhere aren't going to like it. So there's going to be an internal political fight in Congress over this. But say we get it done, then we're going to have to resolve the issue of how the money is dispersed and shared between the major ports who have big issues. I mean, a number of our ports are looking at what are called, these post-Panamax ships, super cargo carriers that require depths to which we have very few harbors that can accommodate them. And they're looking at large costs for that. I think we can build, and that's part of why I'm here today, an incredible coalition, because so far the big ports haven't won this battle. They haven't won it in terms of getting a harbor maintenance trust fund off budget, and they haven't won it in terms of how the money's going to be dispersed. And I think they're going to need a bigger coalition. And the bigger coalition, which I'm going to try and convince them, is going to include small commercial ports and other ports, recreational ports and others, and then enlist nationwide fishermen, recreational boaters, sport fishers, small communities like here on the coast of Oregon, all the way around the country, where we can put together a coalition that could get through Congress and could get this money freed up. And then we would ask for a fair apportionment, a set aside of some of the funds for the smaller non-major commercial ports. I don't think that would be an unreasonable request. We do something very similar in aviation now, where, most of the money is generated at the big airports, but we actually not only spread that money to all the commercial airports in America, we also allocate some of that money to general aviation airports in this country, recognizing that a national airspace system is in the national interest, the same as a national port system, including small ports, is in the national economic interest. So that's the big view, and that's what I'm working on there. But I'm also hopeful today that we can begin to both hear from folks who've dealt with this issue, hear what the problems are, how we might be able to move forward with sort of a self-help, partnering with the state and/or the federal government to look at approaching these problems in a little different way than we have in the past. So with that, I think first we're going to turn to Colonel Eisenhower, who can just, as he wishes, sort of describe his perspective on the issue. Colonel, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Congressman, and thanks for bringing us all together to address our shared concerns regarding coastal ports. As you know, the Corps of Engineers has worked with these ports for decades, so we do understand the local, state, and national importance of all of these coastal ports. As you've said, our nation is facing serious financial challenges, and so it's important that we look to, at least at my level, as not a policy maker, but as a policy implementer, those things we can do to partner with federal, regional, and local agencies to implement solutions that we may jointly identify or individually identify and then work together to implement. One example of us coming together that I think is a success, even though it may not have yet been implemented, is an effort at Port Orford recently where we worked within our authorities because we did not have the capability to dredge them, but to work to get the permits required, working both with the state DEQ, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Port of Port Orford to do what we would term, I guess, prop wash dredging. Something that might be not an ideal solution, but it might be better than doing nothing. So I guess as we look to solutions, everybody have a common understanding that the Corps is required to prioritize our programs based on national policy, and that's what we will do. But know that Portland District is ready to support all efforts within our authorities, both to find new ways and to implement new ways to maintain your ports. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Colonel. Okay, with that, I think first, since this whole idea did come from a local project right here in Brookings, I think I'd turn now to Ted and have you explain your project and how well it worked and how it might be applicable elsewhere.
Thank you. All right, I just wanted to say that I went to that meeting up in Port Orford, and I do. Can everybody hear me? I just want to say that I appreciate the perspective of Colonel Eisenhower, because he is very forthright, gave the perspective, a realistic perspective of the problem at hand, and I think that is, I think that's where we all, there aren't really any easy answers, but I think that if we all recognize there is a problem, then by thinking a little bit outside the box and looking and working together, Colonel Eisenhower's the Corps' contribution just in the context of aiding with permitting that one job, that is really, that's a huge contribution. That's so important because from the perspective of a small port that doesn't have the expertise to do the kind of permitting that needs to be done, I mean, the cost and the experts, finding an expert around here can be difficult. And so being able to look for that kind of help is certainly something that I would not want to underrate. I think that's really important. But I'll just try to get off my soapbox. I wanted to tell you about what we did at the Port of Brooklyn Harbor. Our problem was we had siltation brought in by the tsunami. It affected both of our basins, the sport basin and the commercial basin to different degrees. Now, that compounded an existing problem because we had years of siltation building up in our basins, which is the case for many coastal ports. We've never had a realistic way to address in-basin dredging. It's very costly, especially when you're, in our case, I always think everything's worse for me than anyone else. I feel sorry for myself. I'm in the farthest corner of Oregon, really hard to get a contractor to come here and do some dredging. The mobilization just kills you. That's why when Congressman DeFazio talks about a truck-mounted dredge, the alternative being that we have to mobilize the equipment to come down and do the dredging out for our channels, which if we don't have that kind of help, then our port shuts down in a relatively short number of years. But mobilization is a big factor. So we were looking at possibilities to minimize our cost and work within the amount of FEMA dollars that are available. Is this supposed to go? I'll do what it says. Okay, all right. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So at any rate, that's what got us to where we're thinking about how to deal with this. We only had a certain amount of money from FEMA available to address the dredging, which was, Jack, for the amount of total yardage that needs to be removed from our basin, how much did we remove with the FEMA dollars?
How many did we remove with FEMA only?
Percentage-wise of what needs to actually come out. Yeah.
28,000 divided by about 110,000.
Yeah, so maybe a quarter. Yeah, maybe a quarter was taken out by the FEMA funding, which was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the cost, when we put it out to bid, contractors came in, and the average cost that we got back per yard, per cubic yard removal, was an average about $35 per yard. Now, by taking the approach that we did, we were able to cut that cost. We've proven that we've done 2 projects so far with that equipment that we bought and working with renting equipment and so forth. We've been able to cut that cost down to about $3 to $5 per yard. So radically different cost when, depending on the circumstances and depending on what you can do with what you have in front of you, that's going to vary. But you can see there's quite a bit of freeboard in there, and so that's how we were able to finally to address the amount of yardage that we were able to get out so far. Now we've put together a little. I'll just go through our PowerPoint so you can understand from us the importance of, and I'm sure that most everybody's heard this, but I just want to really emphasize the fact that each one of these little ports, they're little, they don't seem to amount to much, unless you happen to be living in the town where the port is. And it's a huge, each one of these ports is a giant contributor, in some cases, the only contributor to the local economy. I mean, I don't mean to denigrate Port Orford, but, if it wasn't for the port, would you stop? Would you stop in Port Orford? Probably not. There's not a lot drawn there. That thing drives that entire town. So basically, as we've gone through here, we talk about what ports do for our local economies. As the timber industry has suffered, the the ports and fishing and other related activities within the ports have contributed more and more to the actual economies of each one of these local communities. Let's see, tourist, commercial fishing, sport fishing, primary drivers of our economy right now. Okay. Now, this is an example of, for Port of Brookings Harbor, it's actually a really busy port. We're down here in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of people haven't heard of us, but a lot of people have. We have so many bar crossings. This is a very, very busy port. You can see that we had salmon angler trips in 2012. We had 18,610 bar crossings. That's a lot. We had, you can see we have sailing days, we've got fishing days. I mean, we have many people that are utilizing these ports. Every time one of these people, I think our next slide might address that. There's one more thing you may not know about, but since I'm up here and I get a chance to talk about it. Of the salmon caught during the sport season, as far as ODFW's numbers go, salmon caught during the sport season in the state of Oregon, in the ocean, 51% caught out of Brookings. So, if you're not from Brookings, please come here and go fishing next year. We'll set you up. Okay. So anyway, as we talk about the various contributions that you can see from each one of these, we've got the resident voters. They contribute quite a bit. I mean, just about $3 million. The average non-resident, we get people from the valley, from Redding, a lot of people from California come in, and they, $8 million right there. As you can see, it goes up and up. Then we get into the commercial issues. A lot of money comes in. Then there's the multiplier. That money comes directly into our local community, and that's what drives this place. Because there's not really, and we have the mill. The mill is a contributor, but the fishing industry, when crab season, for example, starts in this town, I'll tell you what, you know it. It's when first time some people have seen any money in a long time. Let's see. So points of the importance of as using Brookings as the example. All of these ports have various contributors, why they're important, but it's a port of refuge, the only one south of Coos Bay. It's a place you can get in because of the way that it's facing. You can almost always cross our bar, where oftentimes you can't cross others. We've got a permanent Coast Guard station, and then there is one down in Crescent City as well. It's also a big, these are very important things that we have as far as homeland security and as far as just safeguarding the entire coast. Let's see. By having the ports open, commercial fishing is able to take place, even though a lot of these big boats will travel up and down the coast. Maybe they'll shrimp down there by Fortuna, and they'll come back and they'll unload in Charleston. But if they have a problem, they can come into one of these ports and these don't get killed, and repairs can be made. And that's a very important thing. It allows the entire network of the fishing business and all that ocean commerce to go on. Okay, next one. Let's see. So then we're talking about the two types of dredging that we have that are done in the Port of Brookings Harbor, and this is analogous to most of the ports along the coast. We've got channel dredging. If the port's on the river, you got channel dredging. The Corps has historically handled that, and it's got to be done on a yearly basis. The equipment comes in and gets the bars open and clears out the channel. That's all. Those are federally regulated waters. And then we have the other thing that I talked to you about a little bit earlier, the in-basin dredging. That's the area that has historically been the responsibility of the local port district or whoever's in charge of that, and that's where that's been an issue. This is always, channel dredging up till now has always been able to be handled relatively, in great fashion by the Corps. They show up every year, they do what needs to be done, and all these ports are able to operate, and the contribution, that the Corps makes every year just with that, just on that one little thing, if you think about every one of our ports up and down the Oregon coast, just Oregon itself, that's a huge thing. And to think that they can do what they can do on the budget that they have is pretty amazing. But that still it hasn't been able to address the in-basin dredging. That didn't used to be such a problem. In our port, for example, when it was built, it was built to a 12-foot depth. Okay, so And in those days, boats were smaller, most of the commercial fishing boats were all smaller. For years, it was not a big deal. This problem didn't exist. But then, as the ports start to silt in, and you know, our basins over here catch every bit of runoff that anybody on the harbor bench, and we're all up here in Brookings right now, so I can badmouth harbor. Anything that happens on the harbor bench, on the north end of it, it all ends up in our basin, and we have to deal with it. And whether it's diesel, you may get all kinds of stuff comes out of these culverts and comes right into our basins, and then we've had to dredge it up. And we didn't have the money, we didn't have the contribution from the people that from for example, the county. You know, I mean, the county doesn't contribute to dredging our basin, even though I see that we have a representative from the county here. We've got a couple, so maybe write me a check later. The silt that washes into our basin comes right out of mostly county, county.
We got a lot of questions. But if we can move on to what we really want to try and focus on the solutions.
Okay, so I have a picture of the Aquina back there. That's the boat. It's a one-of-a-kind dredge. It was built, and in fact, it was designed specifically so that it would fit into the turnaround basin in the Brookings Harbor. They had to cut the last, I can't remember, the last 20 feet or something off of it because it was too big a boat to be able to do the job. They designed it specifically and made it work for this job up and down the West Coast. What we used was a different kind of dredge. It's a cutter head dredge that uses suction. We were able to dredge within the basins, go in among the docks, existing docks, very little impact, and we were able to pump that silt that we recovered out over a mile out into the ocean to the EPA-approved dump site, which is where the Aquina normally dumps the stuff that it harvests as well. We were able to float that pipe out there about a mile, and we were able to dredge all this in. It took us a total of just over a month, just over a month, and that was set up, and the actual dredging days were not that many. Once you get set up, it's a very efficient system, and we could have gone faster. We've learned a lot about it, but the cost by doing it in that way, the cost is, I guess, the most important thing. Is you go from, I'm not sure what the core cost is for what the Aquina's cost per yard is, but I know for us, to be able to bring it in at a $3 to $5 a yard cost is a huge thing, and that allows us to be able to look realistically at being able to continue. Right now, we've only, we still have a good portion of the basins to be able to dredge, but by using this technology, we should be able to address that. And I won't waste your time with the rest of it, even though it's a great PowerPoint.
No, you're not wasting time. I just want to give everybody a chance here. We also want to have some audience participation at the end. No, thank you. But I mean, I think the major point is here, you had something that's truck transportable, so you don't lose the ocean transit time, you don't have the problems with the bad weather in transit, and you found that your cost was approximately 10% of what you were quoted commercially to do this work, and we believe these dredges might have other applications, which is why we've invited some other ports here to discuss their problems and whether or not this could be helpful. So with that, I think now we're going to go to the Port of Port Orford, who is probably got the most acute problem of any port on the coast at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Sam Scaffa with the Port of Port Orford. Gary Anderson, the port manager, is also with us tonight. This quick brief might just give some idea of where our resources are, how much we could bring to the table and participate in self-help wise. Just some quick numbers. Just some quick numbers on the port's finances. These are our most recent annual numbers. Revenue at $684,000, expenses $589. So you can see just under $100,000. The landing values at $6.3 million. We have very accurate data from the DF&W on how much value that comes into the port every year's worth. Jobs, if you look at it, 6.3 million divided by the average per capita income in the county of 18 million. That's about 18,000. And the median household income of 35,000, that equates to about 180 jobs. The exact number is somewhere in the middle of that. We don't have exact stats on that. Total assets of $3.7 million. From a local perspective, we collect $202,000 a year in two tax lines at the Port Orford Tax District. That money is to service the debt that we acquired when the dock was built, the new high dock back in 1970. Excuse me, 1999. And locally, we invested $2 million. I think the state granted about $1 million, and federally it was about $3 million. So it was about a $6 million project. So that's what those two tax lines, that's what that $202,000 is. To give you a perspective, the citizens of that district pay only about half of that number for law enforcement to the county. So it's a big commitment. There's a lot of skin in the game there locally. Okay, the return, as we mentioned, was $6.3 million. So locally, that shows a 31.1 return on investment. Pings throughout our economy, probably 7 times over before it's done. So obviously, we're interested. From a state perspective, the state doesn't have any annual commitment. They have granted money in the past. If you take a look at what $6.3 million in revenue at an effective tax rate at 5%, that would generate somewhere around $315,000 annually, which with the zero give an infinite return on investment. And at the federal perspective, the port's been dredged every year except the last 2 for 40. And we just looked at the last 15 years, and it cost about $196,000 a year with the numbers that we have. And if you take a look at the $6.3 million return, that gives you a 3.2 to 1. The whole story here, before I get into that, this is the initial source of a commodity, in this case fish. It hasn't taken into any account value added as that commodity proceeds through the economy. And just talking to people in the food industry, they say that it would be not unrealistic to assume a 40 to 1 on that. So now 630 is 25 million, and 3.2 is 128 to 1, and the jobs are the same. Now, the 196, if you remember back to my first slide, were just under $100,000 in the green every year. Okay, the dredging, unless Ted invented $3 a yard dredging.
Sorry, I meant now it's $28 a yard once we figure it out.
Yeah, that's what we figured out. Okay, challenges. We have some things that are within our capability, but only one that isn't. There's a picture around 1930 of the port. It was natural beat port. That big timber ship is sitting in probably 30 feet of water. After 1970, we started, now we're looking here. This is after 2 years without dredging taken sometime this spring. You can see that there's hoist, or what we use to put the boats in. Now that is a low tide, okay? We can get boats in and out around a high tide, but that restricts what the fishermen can do. We're already seeing a sharp decline in what they're bringing in, and it makes it much more risky. Here's a picture of people out on the 4th of July dredging by bucket and shovel and wheelbarrow. A couple hundred people turned out. Yeah, remember, just like I said, there's a $2 million investment by us, people of the district, that doesn't stop until 2024. That was the length of the term. It's not going to stop, regardless if whether the place is usable or not. That's all I have. Unless there's any questions.
No, it's good for now, Sam. We'll get into the discussion later. Now I want to hear from the Port of Gold Beach.
Well, I'm not going to do a PowerPoint. And I'm going to try to get more, I think we were trying to get more solution-oriented because we know what the problem is. And so I took a glimpse at what the Army Corps is up against. I just pulled a quick statistic out. The Army Corps has 11,000 miles of navigational channels, 300 deep commercial ports, 383 lakes and reservoirs for flood control, of which on the Rogue River, Lost Creek is one of those. And then they have 8,500 miles of flood control levees. So obviously I understand your budget control problems and our little problems. We drop down now to your 600 shallow draft, low use ports. That's what we are, ports that are less than 1 million tons. Well, the Port of Gold Beach, even in its heyday in the 60s when it was exporting lumber, was only exporting 80,000 to 150,000 tons of lumber in its heyday. So it didn't even make the criteria for moderate use port. Our biggest port in the area is Coos Bay. It's barely a moderate use port because it's just over 1 million tons of freight. So it's just in that moderate. So obviously we're your 600 low use stepchildren, I guess you should call us. And obviously we're begging for funding, but we don't have any justification in the Army Corps matrix of funding. That's the reality. I think that's where we are, and we all know that. And what's the solution? That's the question. So obviously we're banging around trying to figure out, obviously everybody says liberate harbor trust fund money and allocate, you know, a portion of the trust fund money to the low use ports. Obviously that's a solution. I'm assuming also the large commercial shippers, the large industry probably have some pretty strong lobbyists that lobby against our little shallow draft, low use ports. I mean, I kind of feel like a welfare mother with 3 kids here begging for more, you know, entitlement money, because I can't sit here as the Port of Gold Beach. We have a wonderful port. We're the mouth of the Rogue River, you know, one of the 8 original wild rivers in the United States. And we've invested millions of private sector dollars and public money in the port to create this beautiful recreational sport harbor. And then the Rogue River, the 4th largest river in the state of Oregon, and we know with 60 to 80 to 100 inches of rain a year, it's a giant gravel machine. It's just pumping gravel and sand and silt into our mouth every year, so the harbor crossing becomes extremely dangerous. I can't sit here and say that we have enough harbor crossings to justify you spending a penny on us. We're about 1,500 crossings a year. They're dangerous at times, but you know, anybody that has a boat knows Gold Beach is a dangerous harbor, so I can understand why you could ignore us and abandon us in all the low-use ports. The one thing I've been advocating with our little group as part of your solution is originally we formed a ports group called the 4 Ports Group. We recently added Umpqua, the 5 ports. And I see the Port of Coos Bay here. I didn't mean to exclude Coos Bay because you're a moderate use port. We kept it to what we called the shallow draft, low use ports, which we are all in: Umpqua, Gold Beach, Bandon, Port Orford, and Brookings. If you took all 600 low use ports and made a 5 port groups, you'd only have 120 groups. If you divided the 600 by 5, you'd have 120 of these 5 port groups. So the 5 ports group, first we came together to formulate a plan on the marine reserves that were being proposed. That was the first thing that hit us, so we formed a group so we'd have a voice. Because what happens in all these public meetings in these coastal towns, we get a bunch of commercial fishermen, a bunch of people that don't have access to the system. They all scream and yell and nothing's done. So we wanted to create a voice, a legitimate voice for these people to have a participation in the Marine Reserve Project. Jeff Griffin over here at the governor's office has been a great help helping us expedite and organize things. Now that the dredging has come along, the 5 ports groups now once again is talking. Well, part of the 5 ports conversations is what created this meeting. I had no clue the meeting was going to be like this. I thought we were coming down just to kind of meet quietly and talk. It was a old bait and switch, and here I am, and I have these speech notes, which I might as well throw out. I might as well throw them out because I thought we were going to have an intimate little meeting and discussing, but so my speech notes are out the window here. But you're speaking about strategy. By the 5 ports coming together, I think we can save you time in the long run because we can get together, we can hold the public meetings, we can vet out all the answers and questions, then we can meet more intimately in the future and really bring to you a strategy of what the 5 ports need as a group. And as we can, and I've met with the other commissioners. They're here. I see them here. They're here. The Bandon people, the Coos Bay people. They're all here in this crowd. As I say, Coos Bay was. I can discuss that with Mr. Koch and Mr. Knutson, who are staring at me right now as to why they're not in our group. But I'll get to that later. And Mrs. McEwen and all. I know all these people. I feel the heat right now. But anyhow, but the point is, I think with our shallow draft, low use group, we can then come to you with solutions. You know, the idea of trucking dredges is not new. I want to tell you that. Nehalem, Sandow, Billiter, all these people have been trucking mobile dredges for the last 40 years. I mean, all the pipeline dredging that took place in Gold Beach was done with mobile truck I mean, they load them on semi-trucks and move them and then reassemble them and pump. So that's not a new concept. The problem is, though, Sandow is now dead and his equipment is rusted away. Vern Schofield is about 80-some years old of Nehalem, and I don't know what he's going to do with his equipment. I mean, I've talked to him a couple of times. Up in the Coos Bay, you have Billiter, and I see John Knutson here. He's very involved in the marine repair business, but I think Billiter's the only one there. But part of the Five Ports group, what we're doing is we're trying to share resources and local knowledge. When we get together as a group, we generate a lot of knowledge, because I've been at the Port of Gold Beach for 40-plus years now in private sector business and involved in the politics of the port. Bob Van Leer was my mentor for years. We'd come to your meetings, and he died a couple of meetings ago, so I've been on my own the last few. But the other idea is by sharing resources and knowledge, we can identify where the pile drivers are, where the dredges are, what we need. And maybe then as the Five Ports, we can come present to you a strategy plan of what we need. Permitting is a problem. The Army Corps permitting process, the joint permitting process, and this is where I've worked with Mr. Griffin a lot with the governor's office, and I've been involved in this Army Corps permitting, and because I do all the river maintenance on the Rogue River. I mean, we maintain all the Rogue River channels, my company does. So I've been involved in the process. It's a really painful process. And I cannot say that the agencies advocate. I feel they're more adversarial. It's a very tough process. So when you talk about government regulation, I've been in the battle for 40 years in this, and from the 70s it was simple because we didn't have to talk to anybody. We just fixed things. And now we have to talk to everybody and justify, and constantly being under jurisdiction and enforcement and all sorts of things. So it's the streamlining of that process is so important to somehow figure that out. And I would love to sit and discuss that as a whole separate meeting, but and I'm sure you've heard that before, but I've been in it for and in federal court 3 different times and in a variety of situations. But that's what the Five Ports group, I think, can help us with, is then coming up with solutions. But right now, I know what you're up against politically is how to break this money out of the trust fund, how to take an Army Corps budget that has to maintain everything we just described. Strategic partnerships are probably going to be important. Like like at our last public meeting in the port, you know, we asked people to bring us suggestions. We have to have the Yaquina probably for at least 5 to 7 days just to do barely routine maintenance. And I know it's $45,000 a day for the Yaquina or the Ession, or whatever you call it, Ession. I guess the question to the Army Corps is, what's the future of those 2 boats? If those 2 boats are eventually mothballed, there will be no dredging on the harbor, on the barge, because you can't dredge the bars with a pipeline suction dredge. It's just too turbulent. So you have to have a fleet of vessels to dredge our harbors if we want to maintain safe crossage, or we're just going to have to abandon that concept completely of dredging those bars. Inside the bays, it's all done with pipeline suction dredging. But so I guess the first question to the Army Corps is the long-term plans for ships. We don't need to answer that now, but that would be a real significant question. And other than that, just breaking loose that money and doing that, and your other comment you made about, and that was one of my comments on the Five Ports deal. The Port of Gold Beach actually owns an airport, so we've also been involved in this NEPAS, FAA, ODA funding process cycle, which is an interesting cycle. And this is kind of what I had presented at one time to the Five Ports group, is that the way the FAA and the ODA, Oregon Department of Aviation, is it's a revolving fund. You know, you have funds that float around. Like right now, we're going to pick up a $1.2 million grant with some, we have to match to redo our taxiway. 5 years ago, we did our runway for 1.5. That money comes around on a cycle every 5 years. It's not every year. The Five Ports group may have to sit and look at you and ask for funding for our group. Then our group will have to decide. We have to work as a group. We can't sit here. I can't sit and say I'm a competitor with Ted and I'm a competitor with the Port Orford. We've got to be a group. And we've got to decide if you're going to throw $3 or $4 or $20 million at us or $4 million at us, we've got to decide what projects we want to put it into. You've seen me at the meetings, the last couple of meetings, trying to, because we said we've pre-engineered our high dock repair. And, you know, that's one of our projects. We need a few $1 million to finish off. That was infrastructure that was built in the 60s that's now corroding and rusting away. And we have a tremendous amount of investment on top of it. So prioritizing the money within our Five Ports group, maybe throwing money at the group, just a concept, but that's where we are right now. And I don't know where else to go at this point. But, yeah.
That's helpful. What, do you want to respond to me, Sam, or other, I was going to do two, but go, you can, go ahead. Did you want to just?
I was just going to amplify on that. Yeah, we brought our brief down there because we're still beating the drum that we believe we show up positive on everybody's budget and don't understand what the problem is. But if, you know, if it was been told to us that, hey, it's, there's no federal dredging, then something along the lines of this might work. We're daunted by the sheer magnitude of the problem, given our resources. If there was some schedule that would say that if there would be a federal movement, a long-range plan, which I'm just, maybe there is one or has been one, that said on these years, maybe there's 2 or 3 years apart, a clamshell works this area. On these other years, the hopper dredges work the area, and then some other years, maybe something else. If there was some framework like that, that would allow us to then fill in the gaps as a 5-port consortium, then I could see something like that workable. But just the sheer amount of dirt to be moved at Port Orford, I mean, I think we would be a liability to our friends. You know.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's no. Okay. Well, we can get into that a little more with the discussion. At this point, Senator Cruz is going to represent the coastal caucus. We have a number of members here today. So, Jeff.
Thank you, Congressman. First I would like to say that Senator Johnson had organized a plane full of people to come down here. Greg Wolf from the governor's office was supposed to be on that plane. Representatives from Pacific Seafood, Port of Garibaldi, and Port of Astoria. And Betsy's plane had just got out of the shop and she was sure it was ready to go, and they loaded everybody and got on the taxiway, and the left engine wouldn't start, and the pilot decided he didn't want to take off with one engine, which is probably a wise move. So my apologies for their not being here. They were very disappointed that the propeller wouldn't go around. But Congressman, before I get into my comments, a couple things. I found it interesting when you were talking about things from a 40,000-foot view, because in the Oregon legislature we talk about things from a 30,000 point view, so I can understand the demarcation there. But on top of that, Congressman, I want to thank you for all of the years that you have paid attention to this issue and got the resources necessary to keep our ports open through earmarks. And I think, I don't know if you've ever been truly acknowledged for your work over the years, but it is greatly appreciated by all the folks on the coast. So thank you very much for that. You know, one of the points we wanted to address, and by the way, speaking for the Coastal Caucus, I think we are absolutely unified on this becoming an incredibly high priority for us to help the federal government as well as the ports and everybody else find solutions to. I'm glad that you spent some time talking about the RAMP Act, and what we will commit to you is anything we can do to help you move that legislation, including talking to our senators. We're more than happy to do that. I think that is a great first step, and I know you've been after that for some years, and maybe now we can hopefully get enough muscle behind it to make that actually happen. So let us know anytime you need us to pull a trigger on something. We're more than happy to step in for you. You know, I think the ports have basically laid out the fact that with, unless we come up with solutions, the Oregon coast is going to die. Okay. So we're looking for a lot of options. We've had conversations. I've had conversations with both Senator Merkley and with Senator Wyden on this issue, and we're looking for any solutions we can come up with, and even to the point of looking at wave energy projects to replace jetties as a potential solution. This is a stretch, Congressman. Okay. Okay. But here's how we make those connections. Clearly, there are some jurisdictional issues that have to be worked out with the Corps. Okay, obviously, because the Corps owns the jetties. But when you look at the fact that Senator Wyden is, I believe, has the gavel in the Energy Committee on the Senate side, okay, and I believe Senator Merkley's on the Appropriations Committee, things are kind of lined up there. And our thought was, if you look at the renewable portfolio that the energy companies have to be reaching in the year 2020, they've hit the benchmarks at this point. Hitting those benchmarks 7 years out is going to be a little more complicated and a little more problematic, so they may have an interest in it as well. But I think we could make the case, for example, that if we're going to that form of energy, that it would be essential to have if the jetty's here, to have a channel to actually create the waves to make that work. So we want to explore the possibility of maybe cross-pollinating and talking to Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley about maybe getting some money from the Department of Energy for a renewable resource to go into this. And we've had conversations with OED and those folks on this, and those will be forthcoming as we go. It's Congressman, that is way out of the box. I understand that. Right. But I think at this point in time, we have to explore any option, any possibility we can, any funding resource we can come up with to try to find a solution to this. I'm glad that the ports are working together so they aren't cutting each other's throat. That's very helpful. I sat through a period of time when the community colleges were knifing each other in the back and getting nowhere, and then they came together and getting a lot more accomplished, and so I'm hoping that the ports can do that as well. I don't have any solutions. I flat out do not. And I'm not here. We're not here to point the finger at anybody. This is just the way things have evolved, and I know that it might be possible. We talked beforehand about just doing a bill in Congress, but as bad as a lot of people thought earmarks were, earmarks allowed a lot of things to happen. Congressman, you know that. As far as the impact on the federal budget, it was pretty negligible. It really was. And, so for us to be able to put a bill in Congress saying we want money to do even the West Coast ports would meet a hell of a lot of opposition. We know that. So at the end of the day, we stand as a group fully committed to doing whatever we can to help. We're exploring the possibility. I talked to some folks in the governor's office about what sort of funding streams we could put forward, because it might be helpful. If the state puts skin in the game, it might make the feds a little bit more friendly towards chipping in as well. And our measure $66 last session, we took some of that money basically and put it into Marine reserves. Okay, it wasn't necessarily the direction that was supposed to go, but we all thought Marine reserves were important to watersheds as well, and we thought putting money into that research was as well. But I would submit that, and one of my arguments is if we let these channels silt in, the predation on smolts going out to the ocean is going to increase. It's significant. So there is a potential connection there. So we're looking at maybe some of those dollars that we might be able to put in. We're also looking at the potential of just doing some lottery bonding. So we have just begun. This is going to be, like I said, probably, I would say, one of the major issues we as a group deal with, at least in the first 2 months of the legislative session. And I know it's going to be on the top of your list as well. And so I want to thank you for bringing this group together. And I'm glad it is this public, because it needs to be. And I just want to say that we are here to help you, Congressman, in any way we can to get to a solution for all of us.
Thanks.
Greg isn't here, but are you prepared to make some remarks about from the governor's perspective? Yeah. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Congressman. And Governor would like to thank Congressman DeFazio for his leadership on this issue. And the governor recognizes that ports on Oregon's coast play a vital role in the economy of the region and the state, and he's very motivated to be part of the solution. I think we can offer some assistance on two levels. One, regulatory. If we need to plan out some of the dredging activity in advance, we can work with the federal agencies. The state agencies organize the regional solutions team. You gave the example of the prop wash dredging permit in Port Orford. We worked on that, and in fact, that went very well, even though we had a pretty tight timeline. The Corps actually got the permit out in about 30 days. In fact, I was impressed. You had a staffer in Coos Bay working for the Corps who actually wrote the findings for NOAA Fisheries, which got their blessing, expedited things, and we had to catch up with you guys. So we had 3 or 4 permits from the state, which took us about 40 days to get out the window. But all in all, it was pretty good. We tried to coordinate efforts. We also worked in Brookings Harbor after the tsunami on regulatory streamlining. The number of permits were needed when you did your reconstruction work in the marina. And also there was some creative funding that we had to put together to help match the federal fundings that came through. So we've been working on the regulatory streamlining piece, and we need to work more with federal agencies to kind of work together on that and iron some things out. But that's one thing we could offer on this project. The other one would be potentially funding. Oregon has Connect Oregon funds in the past, and if it's passed by the legislature this session, that's a multimodal funding source that could potentially be used to purchase some dredging equipment for the ports. I think your proposal, if we have a proposal that's a combined proposal from a number of ports, and you share your resources and share some of the capacity there, that makes it much more compelling and can solve a number of things in one action or one effort. So Connect Oregon is potentially a source. It would be eligible, I believe, under the guidelines. In fact, a number of years ago, Port Orford did apply, started the application for I think it was a portable dredge. I'm not sure if it was a suction dredge. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough sort of consensus on the technology or the applicability of that, and so the application didn't move up. But I think if we have agreement on what works, agreement on the proposal that that it's feasible, that it'll have a much better chance to Connect Oregon. And then finally, something you mentioned, and the governor wanted me to mention this, that he is open to partnering on legislative initiatives this session on this topic, given that there remains some unallocated bonding capacity in his budget. So with that, those are the comments I want to make, Congressman.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could, just a point I should have made. Just for your knowledge, Congressman, I have made connection with the environmental community as to the issues we're dealing with, and at least initially, I think we have support if, we do this the right way. So one of those things that could potentially be a hurdle, I think can be ignored. They understand the importance of our ports, and as far as the Connect dollars, I think basically by definition, virtually every river in the state has been determined to be navigable, so we should be good on that. So.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and no, it seems to me that perhaps, since these are routine, regular, predictable activities, we have spoil sites for most of the port, and that there ought to be some way to simplify or streamline the process, and I'd be happy to work on the federal end and see if there's some way we could delegate to the state. There was a question that we had about the future of the dredges. I'm going to say something about that, and then I want to ask the Colonel about their current state and their projected longevity. I had my staff go back because I've been fighting these issues for a long time, and we still haven't been able to come up with the original study, but there was a study back in the 90s over the minimum dredge fleet federally. And what was going on was there were some very powerful, mostly not on the West Coast, private dredging interests who wanted the feds to stop dredging. because it would, you know, they could make more money if the feds weren't bidding back against their bids and setting those standards. And actually, I went through this fight over a number of years, and basically everything got retired except our dredges, and that was work done by both myself and at that time Senator Hatfield and others in the delegation, because there was a hard push on, and it was led by a senator from the South whose wife happened to work for the private dredging interests. And you know, they put most of our ships in mothballs, and ours, I'd just ask, Colonel, can you give us like their current state of repair, the projected longevity, and that?
Congressman, I'm going to call on my Deputy District Engineer, Mr. Kevin Bryce, to reply on that. He's got a lot more history with the district than I do as my senior civilian.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Again, Kevin Bryce. I'm the Deputy District Engineer for the Corps of Engineers Portland District. Sir, it's a very good question. Just as a context, we have two dredges, as mentioned, the dredge Essayance and the dredge Equina. The dredge Essayance is much larger, 450 foot. The dredge Equina is a smaller, 250 foot dredge. And they, of course, based on their size, do different missions. The Essayance does the mouth of the Columbia River, the ocean going. The Equina, as mentioned by Ted, is designed to do a lot of work on the Oregon coast. Both dredges are project funded. So therefore, as you know, the Corps of Engineers is funded by our authorized projects, and we are appropriated as such. And we use that money to pay for the dredges. So therefore, when we get money to dredge the Columbia River, part of that money goes and pays for the Essayance. When we get money to do the coastal ports, that pays for the Equina. And so the short answer to the question, as far as longevity, as we look to the future, the Essayance and the large port and the large work that they do, we do believe that it looks like that will continue on long term. With the Equina, quite frankly, since a lot of the small ports up and down the Oregon coast and some in California, some of them are falling under the not being funded, that does present a challenge for us to continue to fund for the Equina. As of this time, we are working with Corps headquarters, making sure they are aware of the status of the Equina. The Corps headquarters is looking at the minimum fleet that the Corps has. The Corps has more than just our two dredges across the nation, and looking at what that implications may be. We do not have any solutions right now, but there is a cause and effect of if projects are not funded that the dredge is used, then we have to find ways of paying for that dredge, and we are in the process of reviewing that, seeing what we might do.
I was wondering about its physical, I mean, I think we had some rehab work at some point. How is it physically?
Roger, yes, sir. Both dredges physically are in great shape as far as being able to work.
Okay, all right. So basically, operations is the issue, not so much that we've got a structural problem.
That is correct, yes, sir.
That's helpful to know that. With that, I'd like to see if any of the other elected representatives have anything they want to add or they think that'd be very timely. And if not, I'm going to try and engage the group up here in a little bit. I mean, and then we'll go to questions or reflections or ideas from the public, because as you've heard up here, we don't have all the solutions. I like the idea of the 5 ports, but we're going to need coalitions like that among other groups of ports. I mean, something that we need a national movement, and
well, it's 120 to divide the 6.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, okay. Whatever would work logically, but I mean, are you aware that, say through the National Association or elsewhere, that other people are organizing along those lines or thinking along those lines and having similar problems?
Well, it's a logical response to the problem.
Right.
I mean, I didn't know they were, but I would assume.
Yeah.
I didn't think we were on the vanguard of it, but I mean.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm saying it's something we're creating here.
Yeah.
Came about because of Marine Reserves, we came together. There was a lot of energy emotional energy being put into that.
Right.
So we thought we'd help get the
Sure.
public involved.
Yep. Anybody up here who has other ideas or reflections before we turn to see what wisdom we might get from other people who are here today? Okay, well, yeah, go right
I
ahead.
think you're just going to find that we're all supportive of continued dredging.
How many ports on the north coast are you aware?
About 5.
That
I
have
have
the-
6, but Tillamook isn't a water port, so.
Garibaldi's probably in tough shape right now, especially in our harbor.
Yeah.
And the Skibbon, which is a tiny little one, has been silting in so much, and I think all they need is just an extra emergency authority from the Corps to go ahead, and they're trying to just collaborate with the scouts too. But when the rivers silt in, you gotta wait for the tides, and the boats can't get in to deliver the fish, and they're your feet start. That's that kind of stuff you can't control.
Right.
But yeah, we all want more dredging.
I just want to assure Commissioner McNair that.
Why don't you say up there?
Okay. Just a comment to the commissioner. I think the Port of Coos Bay really is here today just as cheerleaders. We understand, that being a moderate port, that we're in a different role, but we're not that close to being.
You want to join the group?
We may need to.
We'll send you an invitation.
But our staff and our CEO are here just to be cheerleaders. We know this is a very important endeavor, and we're here to help.
You're a much bigger fish in the
Right.
pond. You're an international port. You guys are appointed by the governor, you know.
How about that?
Okay. With that, we'd be happy to, if anybody in the audience have some reflections or ideas, you can just sort of line up and, give us a short statement or some ideas. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we were going to have first P-O-O-R-T was going to ask a question.
Sorry.
And then that would be, we have Tyson, I'm told. No? Okay, well, what? Okay, and then Amy from Senator Berkeley's office, okay. And you might explain P-O-O-R-T to the audience, and then,
So my name's,
I think it's on.
there. All right, so my name's Tyson Racer. I do work with the Port Orford Ocean Resource Team. However, I come today actually representing an ad hoc group we put together in Port Orford, not associated with the Port Orford Ocean Resource Team. We've come to call it the Citizens to Keep the Port in Port Orford. We've started a petition. We were a part of the 4th of July event that Sam showed a photo of to gain awareness around the situation and did the self-dredging. And we've also tried to engage with the Army Corps of Engineers, of course, the Port of Port Orford, and anybody that we can reach out to find a solution to our problem in Port Orford. So I've just been back there listening to what everybody had to say and kind of prepared a few notes on what I'm thinking as these things are coming
You're
up.
uncomfortable. You can take that microphone out of the holder because you're a really tall guy and you have the pen. There you go.
That's much better, yeah. Good idea. Great idea. So just as a reminder to everybody that's here today, in 1968, Port Orford and the Army Corps of Engineers worked together to put in the breakwater that's currently in place. 1 year later, 1969, Port Orford applied for emergency dredging due to the shoaling issue and sanding in of our port. And that didn't change for 45 years. 2013, nothing has changed. The only thing that's new in Port Orford is now we're no longer getting dredged. So the situation really can't get any worse, and it's getting worse and worse as time goes by. Right now we're experiencing severe life and safety risks at Port Orford, of course. With the crabbing season coming in, people have to get out to sea. We've lucked out that it's been a very calm winter in Port Orford. There still has been some issues. People have broken parts of their boats. They've broken the masts off their boats coming in during rough seas. I know people have smashed their hands, broken some bones. Things have happened down at the port. Luckily, nobody has died, and that situation hasn't gotten any worse, though I could imagine what would happen if we had a rougher winter. This is people's livelihoods, and to say that they shouldn't go fishing is just not realistic. They have to support their families, and that's what they're going to do. And along with that, in the past 45 years, as that harbor has been shoaled in, it used to be that deep water port that we're all looking at a photo of right there with a 150-foot long vessel sitting next to the dock. And since it's been sanded in, we're now considered a shallow port. We can no longer use that as an economic driver. I've been paying attention to the territorial sea planning process. I remember looking at a document that once said Port Orford wouldn't be considered for shipping out any of those wave energy generation devices or in the development stage of those wave energy generation devices because it's a shallow port. If we could fix the situation down there, Port Orford would have an opportunity for economic development and for the livelihood of our community. So this goes beyond just fishing. It goes into economic development and just keeping our community alive for the future. So I wanted to say those few things. And as far as what Senator Cruz was saying about the wave energy device, thinking way outside of the box, and this wave energy generation device that also includes dredging, That's not so far out of the box in our minds. We've been in Port Orford, we have gotten some interest from a company called Shift Power Solutions out of San Diego. And they've actually developed a device that they need to test. And Port Orford has opened up a portion of their harbor to actually test out a device that absorbs the power of the waves and transforms that into mechanical energy, sprays out some power in through some nozzles, and moves the sand out of the harbor, essentially. It's an already active idea. She's got funding, and she hopes to get that in the water in June to test it out in our harbor and see what happens with that. So it is a possible solution. It's already happening, and as far as working with the Army Corps, working with the state, working with the federal government in whatever way we can, I just ask that we try and support those type of solutions and really look for a 21st century solution to our problems here on the South Coast and of course across the nation. If we can get those ideas developed, that has huge implications for what we can do around the nation and really being innovative, what we're known for as Americans. In addition to that, the five ports and getting them together to work together, of course, is a great idea. What was the name of the cutter head dredge solution? That seemed like a great idea as well, and I highly recommend we look into that, possibly investing in something for the South Coast, something that we could share throughout the 5 ports. We could all invest in that. There's a lot of different solutions that are out there. Do I know the right answer? Does anybody that's sitting in this room have the right answer? That's the problem. I think there are too many possible solutions and nobody knows what the right answer is, and I don't know if there's one right answer. So I just ask that you guys support innovative 21st century solutions to solve our problems. And we start doing that today. We start doing that now. We can't wait any longer.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating about that device, so thanks. I want to follow up on that. I might just ask, and we're going to recognize from Senator Merkley's office, Amy Amrine, and Amy, if you come forward. But Colonel, I remember when I was trying to get, when we were doing some of the emergency dredging, and I was asking if we could just get the dredge to stop and help Port Orford, and the Assistant Secretary said it just you couldn't do it. But then sort of as a consolation, we got a little bit of money to study, I think, potential non-dredging solutions for Port Orford allocated in the budget. Are you aware of that?
Congressman, what we got were $90,000 for a study that's ongoing, and it's a sediment study within the port area as far as how does a sediment travel. It's a modeling study to determine what would be some of the effects regarding the breakwater Tyler mentioned. If we were to notch it, or if we were to remove it, or if we were to rebuild it, what would the impacts and effects of that be on the sediment in the thing? So it's a modeling study, and it's ongoing at this time. We've not gotten any results.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I mean, just from the new technology he's mentioning, it might be worthwhile to have your people knowledgeable about that too. I mean, if there's some technology that could actually, say you did notch the jetty and you're trying to move the silt out, and there's some kind of device like this which works off wave power, that might be an interesting mating of ideas. Anyway, it's just something that...
Yes, Congressman, and Tyler brought this to our attention when we were out at Tyson? My apologies. Yeah. He brought it to our attention when we were at the Port of Port Orford, and Kate Groth, our coastal ports manager, could you raise your hand, Kate? Yeah. She's aware of it, and we've also engaged with the Shift Power Solutions group to discuss some options and what opportunities there are there.
Great. No, thank you. That's good, because I like the idea that we're going to try and think out.
Congressman, before, if I could just also point out that the first Marine Reserve site off the coast of Oregon that's got baseline data and we can do research on is Port Orford. It's off Port Orford, and it would be nice if we could launch boats to go out and do the research. So there are other aspects.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for bringing everyone together for this conversation. I think it's obviously much needed, and the ideas of innovation and outside the box thinking is much needed. I wanted to just let everyone know that Senator Merkley is also on the Environment and Public Works Committee as well as the Appropriations Committee. And tomorrow there is going to be a hearing on what's called the WRDA bill, which is the, not the appropriations, but the authorization bill for the Corps of Engineer for projects and work for the Corps. And part of that conversation will be discussion on the using the harbor maintenance funds for their intended purpose. And the Senator will be fighting hard for Oregon ports, small ports and medium-sized ports, and using that, the harbor maintenance funds for its intended use. So I want to let everyone know that the Senator and the Senate are taking this issue up, and hopefully we'll have some positive results.
Great.
But we know the Senate, so we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
No, but that's good news, because, I mean, we did get it through the House last time, and it was just, we couldn't get
Right.
agreement with the particular group of senators we were dealing with in
Right.
the conference, but I'm glad to know Jeff's fighting for that.
Right.
That's great.
Thank you.
And we had a request by one of the Curry County commissioners, if you wanted to.
Very kind of you, Congressman.
Sure.
We thank you very much for arranging this. And we thank you, by the way, before I forget it, for your work with the ONC lands and the efforts that you put in for that. It's critical for our area. Your plan is excellent. I'm not quite sure where it stands now. I know the governor's involved and various other parties, so we thank you for all the effort you put in on that. I wanted just to mention that I believe we have all three county commissioners here today from Curry County. Commissioner David Brock-Smith is here. Commissioner Susan Brown is in the back.
Okay.
So I just want to emphasize that we have a strong interest in this problem, and you know, we stand ready to help any way we can. We were here during the tsunami to assist. As I recall, we hand carried the emergency declaration up over a weekend to the governor's office.
Yeah, I was sort of tracking where you were at then.
That was an interesting period of time. I remember traveling at a high rate of speed through the low area going to Gold Beach to my office that day because the tsunami was due to hit at that particular time. I wanted to mention that we have written a letter to the Army Corps. We were asked by the Port of Port Orford to do so, and on behalf of dredging in small ports, and in particular the Port of Port Orford, and we did do that. Just speaking as one commissioner, we will be ready to assist wherever and whenever we can, even with our depleted resources as they are. So,
Right. Well, thank you.
and maybe with silt too, as Ted mentioned. Eventually, we'll get to that.
Thanks
Thank
to the other
you, sir.
members of the board for being here today. And so now we got folks lined up. Just come on down to the microphone, get in a little line, and if you got some brief comments or questions for anybody here, go right ahead.
Thank you very much.
Identify yourself first.
I'm Tom Calvanese. I'm also involved with the Citizens to Keep the Port in Port Orford. I live in Port Orford. I work in Port Orford. I do research in Port Orford, and I fish out of Port Orford. And I've been living there for the last couple of years, watching our harbor filling with sand and watching the effects of that on the town, the economy of the town, and the safety of the people who work out of the port. And I don't want to repeat too much of what's been said. Tyson covered a couple of points I wanted to make, so I'll leave that. I appreciate you bringing up this so-called way out of the box idea about using what we're calling 21st century technology to address our problem. And we feel pretty strongly that it's important for us to really look for innovative solutions. I keep hearing that everybody wants to support innovative solutions, so let's support innovative solutions, particularly when they're coming from people who are working in industry, who are willing to do the legwork, do the research, do the R&D, the development, the fundraising, cooperate around the permitting, fly around on their own expense, and do the work. And I was disappointed to hear from the individual who's actually working on the AquaShift Power Solutions project that the approach that they were ready to take, which was to test a device in our navigational channel that could move enough sand to make our channel navigable, was told that they will not be able to do that, and they're going to have to be pushed back into a simple in-the-water test. So I'm feeling a little bit of a disconnect when I hear we're supportive of innovative ideas, but what I'm hearing is we're supportive of innovative ideas, but not so fast. And what concerns me is we have a situation, as you heard, where we've been blessed with really good weather, and we haven't had too much anything horribly tragic happen at our dock. But I would just propose to you that we would really prefer not to wait until we have something really tragic happen at our dock. I'm not willing to accept the approach that says we're going to wait until somebody dies. And to be perfectly frank, I've been told that directly by staff at the Corps that I spoke with about this problem. When will we get prioritized? Does someone have to die? And I was told, unfortunately, that's what's going to have to happen. I don't find that acceptable, and I think that we have to address the life safety problem, and I have a couple of quick questions for you. If we have an existing authorization that limits us to the current footprint, which is what we've been told, and at the same time, we're saying that we want to pursue innovative ideas that fall up outside of our existing footprint, then when do we begin the process of amending that authorization to allow us to explore those innovative ideas that are outside the box, so to speak? It seems like we're caught in a catch-22 here. So I'm asking, when do you begin the process of amending the current authorization to allow these new ideas to be pursued? And I'm asking, when do we get the Coast Guard involved to assess the safety of our harbor, or do we wait until we have a horrible tragedy on our hands to step up to that responsibility? I don't think it's acceptable to not address that. And when it comes to what you said about research, I'm one of those people that has to launch a boat, sometimes with researchers aboard who are not well experienced in the process, which is already pretty tricky. And it's a very difficult position to be put in, to be taking researchers out on boats that are in a situation that's very risky to begin with, and only gets more risky when we have even a little bit of swell. And by the way, the state also invested almost $500,000 in setting up a research lab in Port Orford to do that work. And it seems to me like we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not addressing the infrastructure needs we need to operate that facility.
On the energy project which I just heard about for the first time,
right.
Who told them that they couldn't do what they wanted to do?
I'm not clear on that. I can only relay to you what I was told by the individual who's on the project, that somehow in the decision-making process between the Corps and the port, that it was decided that that is not going to be allowed. So if that's not true, correct me. That's just what I was told.
We do have, there's someone representing. Could the person who you referred to respond to that, Colonel? Someone over there?
I don't know.
No, I'm trying to get an answer.
Kate,
See if we can get one right now. Well, otherwise we'll get one later.
Come to the microphone.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I want to commend the folks here in Brookings for coming up with a solution and implementing it and making something happen. I think that's a great example for the rest of us.
Here's a mic. Hand her the microphone. Identify yourself again, please.
I'm Kate Groth. I'm the Coastal Project Manager for the Corps of Engineers. And the answer was not no. It's a modification of an authorized project, so it would have to go through the Section 408 process.
Which is a permitting process? I don't,
Sir, the Section 408 is an authority. Headquarters U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the approval authority for it, and is to modify a federally authorized project.
Okay, and can that be done in an expedite? I mean, perhaps I can help expedite. I mean, I'd like to have more communication about this, if you could, about what they're proposing and what your concerns are and what it would take to get headquarters to approve it, because it is a very interesting idea. It's the first I've ever heard of it today, so I mean, I'm intrigued by the idea. So I know you can't respond right now, and Carol can't respond. But
Yes, sir, and I'll have Mr. Bryce get with Ms. Ford.
Okay, all right.
Work out the details.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for bringing that up. And on the Coast Guard issue, I will ask them what their position is in terms of the life safety issue. Thank you.
Hello, Congressman, and thank you for the time. I want to thank you for coming here. I'm Rob Taylor. I'm from Bandon, Oregon. And as a person whose family owns a small business here, who's not related to the fishing industry, we still depend on all the people who utilize our ports, and that's why dredging is important. And here we are discussing about the money that we're going to need for that dredging, when at the very same hand, we've got other federal agencies who are trying to do things like the Bandon Marsh expansion, where they're going to try to increase that 45,000 acres, which is going to cost up to $72 million. That would cover your project right there. And obviously, we can't take care of the infrastructure we have because we're fighting for that money. Then you have things like the U.S. Forest Service trying to close 85% of the coastline by closing 62% of the trails. Once again, you're closing off business to the very beaches that we need, and this is money that could be used for that port dredging. You've got a president who just created a new 9 million acres for the spotted owl. You've got the BLM who has $90 million.
Sir, do you have a suggestion
And so
or a question?
Yes, my suggestion is that we stop spending that money on destroying economies like my economy in the abandoned area, and we take that money and we utilize it for building infrastructure, which is what government was here for. And when Senator Cruz says he's not sure who to point the finger at, sir, I have to point it somewhat at you, and to a lesser extent, somewhat to our governor and the members of the House of our own state legislature.
Well, thank you, sir.
So, and that's what I would suggest, is that we take that funding and stop wasting it on destroying the
Sir,
economy.
if I may respond, there is no funding for an expansion of the Bandon Marsh, and as you're well aware, I was very surprised that, shortly after they dedicated the project, that they were looking at an expansion. I've expressed concerns. They are doing a study. They would have to come to Congress for the money, and I'm not about to vote money at this point, for an expansion of the Bandon Marsh when we have many other pressing problems to which, the money could potentially be dedicated. So, thank you very much.
Sir, may I also point out that $2.4 billion just came from the BP oil settlement to go to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and that foundation is, I believe the bill for the reauthorization for that foundation is sitting right on your subcommittee, and you can stop the funding right there. Maybe
Sir,
push that some other places.
I don't think that's quite accurate, but I'm happy to check into where the
All right.
BP money's
Well,
going.
thank you
but
for
I don't
your
think the BP money's coming to Oregon because the damage was down in Louisiana, and that's where the money's going.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Congressman. My name is Carl Page, and I'm a member of the Chetco Watershed Council. And I would like to address specifically the port of Brookings, Harbor, and Boat Basin number 2. By dredging it, you are addressing the symptom, not the problem. The problem is the tributaries that enter the harbor, specifically Tuttle Creek, which is a catastrophe and is a poster child for what we shouldn't do. If you would address these problems and stop the silt, and the nutrients would have been identified as huge polluters to the estuary, we could reduce the sediment going into the estuary. So we need to address where these sediments are coming from them and correct those sediment issues.
I'm in complete and total agreement.
And you could probably get a grant from NOAA Fisheries through their Urban Creeks grant money. There is several $100 million in that. And because Tuttle Creek was once a prime coho stream, I think you could use that as a reason, because I remember less than 10 years ago seeing fish up there, but they're gone now. And it's because of the poor education of people that live along the stream and what they push into the creek. So I would suggest you identify the major sources of sediment entering the estuary and reduce that so you don't have to spend so much in dredging.
I would be happy to talk to the people that have the jurisdiction over those tributaries. That's fine, but it's not before. But we'll certainly identify.
Yeah.
No, prevention is, is a good point. I think we're in agreement on that, and this would probably have to do with mostly the state, I would assume, and so we've got state legislators here, and we'll see what the state can do in that arena.
Good. And one last thing, over 12 years ago, the State of the Chetco report was developed. We have the Oregon plan and other plans for saving fish where recommendations were made and nothing was ever done in the Chetco. And now the Watershed Council identified these, identifies the stresses, and we're vilified for it. Conservation and restoration are dirty words in this town. Wherever I go, people are restoring, but not in this town. There's no money for restoration, and nobody wants to tighten their belt. Nobody wants to conserve anything. And this is a backward town.
Okay, thank you. I think we had some agreement there. Let's stick with that. Yes, sir.
Hi, Gary Milliman, City Manager of Brookings. The Port of Brookings is not located physically within the city, as you know, but it's a major economic generator for the community. Mayor Ron Hedenskog is also with me here today. We're very concerned about this issue. Senator Cruz, your comment about thinking out of the box got me to thinking about the past. I was the city manager in Fort Bragg, California, another small port, back in the 1970s and through 1995. And your comment generated a memory that the Corps of Engineers in the 80s and 90s was modeling a breakwater or a jetty for the port of Fort Bragg. And there was a company that approached the city and the Corps of Engineers at that time to integrate a wave energy device either in the breakwater or in the jetty. So there may be some research data that certainly is somewhat dated now, probably a decade old or more, 2 decades old. But somewhere in the archives of the Corps of Engineers, there may be some research data on this concept of incorporating wave energy devices in breakwaters or jetties. Also wanted to mention that we had an issue in Fort Bragg with dredging involving not having a dredge spoils site. And I know that's not the issue here, but we looked out of the box for funding on how to deal with that issue, and found and were successful in securing funding under the Community Development Block Grant Program and the then Urban Development Action Grant Program, which is no longer funded, to secure capital improvement funding for dredging as a job preservation measure under those economic development programs. So we looked at some non-traditional sources of funding. I think looking at Travel Oregon and economic development funding opportunities and wave energy and Department of Energy and whatever it is. Don't be totally focused on port dredging funding. You may very likely be able to link up with other activities.
Those great ideas. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Congressman,
Yeah, go
I'd
ahead.
point out for your information, there are basically, I think, 2 different types of jetty-based energy projects that we think have incredible promise, and there are currently test sites in Ireland, Spain, the Azore Islands, and Norway. Norway probably being the one I think that probably shows the most promise for what we're trying to do in Oregon. So there is some research. I could have done a slideshow, but I chose not to.
Well, we did hear about another one. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, the folks from Southern California, but that may be another one to put on your radar screen. So, yes. Yep.
Hi, I'm Heather Stebbings with the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association. Thank you so much for convening this discussion today. From our perspective, the long-term effort, as you mentioned, is the a fix for the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. And while we do have that long-term goal in mind, hopefully sooner than later, at the same time sympathetic to what's going on at the Port of Port Orfords of the world. So I wanted to answer your question about kind of smaller ports banding together to try to find more innovative solutions. There have been a couple of conversations we've heard about. The state of North Carolina and the state of Florida have partnered with the core districts there to help find funding for these projects. Our fear in the past has been that they may, since they're showing that they can almost take care of themselves, they may somewhat take themselves out of the federal process. But we've been assured by the core division over there that that's not the case, and it could potentially be an interim solution while we look at the long-term Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. And then also, in terms of buying equipment, the state of Washington helped a coalition of 5 ports in Southwest Washington buy a dredge. They gave them grant funding and some additional state money, and then the ports had some of their own that they used to purchase it. It's a different situation. They don't have the braking bars and the challenges we have with maintaining our nav channels down here, but it's an example of how there have been some partnerships and looking to find solutions. So we do have those examples out there that we can learn from. I think in that particular situation, it's been much more challenging than they thought, just operating and maintaining the dredge. there are lots of things to consider when going into something like that, but there are solutions that we can look at in the interim.
Okay, thanks, and we'll look to PNWA as a resource on these issues, because that wasn't.
I wanted to comment on that partnership when I was referring. Because I was warned by our marine engineer that consults with us, when you start proposing your own projects, the Army Corps is likely to abandon you when you bring up your own solution and pursue it. That's why when I threw that out, I want to make sure we're calling this a strategic partnership. That if we propose something like at the Port of Gold Beach or something, that we work with you, we don't want the Corps to then abandon. That was our warning, was be careful how you proceed, and I want to kind of make sure we keep that on the table.
Yeah, I don't think the Colonel would. Go ahead, Colonel.
Right, thank you, Congressman. Yeah, the decision as far as those partnerships go, that reaches the highest levels, even above the Corps, to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. That's where those types of agreements are signed between states and the federal government. And then we, again, are the policy implementers, so we would execute that. For example, in North Carolina, they have done that, and the state's providing funding, and Wilmington District's dredges are being used to perform that work. And we could probably arrange something similar, but understand the decision authority isn't at my level, but we will absolutely, within our authority, work up our chain to try to make that happen. And as I understood Senator Cruz speaking, the Connect Oregon, that might be a valid source of funding for that. Maybe, maybe not.
So in North Carolina, they're using a federal dredge, and they're using state money to pay for O&M? Is that it?
They're using state funding to pay for the dredge operation, sir.
Oh, for the dredge operation itself. Okay, so the state didn't take control. So you're bringing down a federal dredge with a federal dredge crew, but it's being paid for by the state then?
Correct, Congressman.
Okay, all right, okay.
Well, the reason I was saying is like at the Port of Gold Beach, we have a project we're targeting which we might call preemptive strike on a migrating gravel bar that's eventually going to end up in the navigational channel, which will eventually have to maintain federally. There might be a way with a partnership that we might look at it ahead of time, and with state funding, local funding. Gold Beach has been pretty independent, as you know. We built our own dikes and a number of things over the years, and so there's some ways to look at it, but we want to make sure we're partnering, and we'll discuss that later.
Yep, no, I'm glad you brought that. Yes, sir.
My name is Randy Waters from Gold Beach. You're here today to discuss long-term solutions keeping critical dredging for South Coast ports. Off the top of my head, I can think of two solutions to raising money to cover the expenses for this endeavor. First and foremost is quit locking up our local public lands into wilderness areas, force the U.S. Forest Service into doing their jobs to get rid of them. Our forests need to be thinned out and harvested. Our communities need that O&C timber money to survive and keep our schools open for our kids. There's no sense in locking me out of the wilderness area that I maybe discover a rich vein of gold or other precious mineral. With this discovery, there would be added revenue for the county, added jobs, and more prosperous county in which to live. Second, and nearly as important, each community has some kind of rock quarry that take care of our building needs. I'm continually reading about the difficulties our local rock quarries, Tidewater and Freeman Rock, in trying to get permits to dig for these building materials. This is not only for our communities, but in some cases the entire state when the need arises. Let's help these and all coastal quarries succeed by helping them acquire barges and equipment similar to the barge operation on the Umpqua River at Reedsport. With the exception of Port Orford, these barges could be utilized to remove the rock and gravels from our harbors. This material could be crushed into usable material for the county and private citizens' need or for their building projects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Dave Harlan. I'm the Ports Manager for Business Oregon. I've been involved with these issues for 20-plus years. I'm also an executive committee member with PNWA. My colleague and I, Mark Freeman, are down here to not only attend this meeting, but we're here to talk to the South Coast ports about a requirement that the legislature put in place for strategic planning. And we have grant money available for that. Based on some of the comments that I heard today, there may be some opportunities for the ports to perhaps look at some of these issues collectively through their strategic planning process. And we're going to be meeting with the Curry County ports while we're down here. Other thing of interest, we have an RFP on the economic, to look at the economic impact of Oregon ports, both collectively and individually. It's in final draft form. Hope to be out looking for services in the next month or so, and that hopefully will serve some of your advocacy efforts and also serve at the statewide level. And then with respect to regulatory streamlining, the state adopted a 2010 port strategic plan, and one of the recommendations coming out of that is to develop coordination agreements between the state agencies. I've been actively talking to Dick Peterson over at DEQ. We've got a real rough draft. Hope to talk to Dick again about it. But we do feel that having those discussions on the front end may help speed some of these projects. The NOAA project in Newport went through at a record speed because everybody was pulling in the same direction at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congressman, could I suggest that you bring these recommendations that you were talking about to Senator Roblin's committee? I think that
Sure.
would be a great public hearing.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah.
Congressman Dave Bassett, professional engineer. To me, there never has been a box. So the fundamental question is not really throwing public money at dredging, but what do you do with the spoils? Rather than put them offshore where they eventually, in storms, they come back pretty much where they were. And I know that there's people who contest that. But just a couple miles away, you pay $200 for a 10-yard dump truck of essentially the same material: sand, gravel, silt, topsoil. It has chromite in it, has gold in it. It's, you know, in my dad's era, we'd have simply turned these ports over to the gold miners and they'd clean them out for us, no problem.
Well, okay, that is breaking down some barriers, and we'll maybe we can see an RFP out there by the ports. But I have heard of utilization. That there was a big issue up on the Columbia when they were doing the deepening on what to do with the spoils, and one of the ideas was construction material utilization. Some of the stuff is suitable, some of it is, you know, too much silt. So
It has salt water in it.
yeah,
That's kind of the fundamental. But, you know, there's things you can do about that.
yeah, yes.
Congressman Ray Buhager. I work with Peter Friedman in Washington, representing through Business Oregon all of the Oregon ports on the coast and up the river. I traveled here to support your efforts to stand with the ports on this really important issue. We look forward to working with you to put together that coalition you talked about. We need to free up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund money. We want to continue looking at these alternative solutions that we've talked about, but I also want to reinforce that we need to continue working to free up the, I guess we'll call it the traditional money. And I think that we're hopeful that in the near term, the appropriations process is closed out for the FY13 fiscal year, and that there is an additional pot of money. And we want to work with you, want to work with the rest of the delegation, and want to work with the core district to send the message to core headquarters that this tremendously small $30 million pot of money, while it's there for the entire nation, we need to send that back to Oregon. We look forward to working with you and with the core to do that, to deliver that message to core headquarters.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Congressman. I'm David Brock-Smith, Chair of Curry County Board of Commissioners, and I want to thank you for being here. It's greatly appreciated. But more importantly, I'm a third-generation resident of Port Orford, so I appreciate Port Commissioner Scaffo leaving that up there.
You remember that?
Well, no, I'm not that old. But a few more points about Port Orford with regards to, that I don't think were mentioned, is what's so important. You saw the figures that were coming in and how much revenue is generated through our fishing industry, but one of the fantastic things about that is it's new money coming into our community to be dispersed throughout our area. And also, there's roughly 30 to 35% of our local residents are supported in one way or another by that port. So it has a great impact. I appreciate also Port Commissioner McNair's comments, and I thank the coalition of port commissions that are getting together, because I think that's a first step in a good process to get this done. And I appreciate your comments with regards to Ship Power Solutions, and you just heard this evening, she was here after and came up after the Colonel Eisenhower was in Port Orford at his last meeting, presented to us there. The Port Commission and at that point started embracing the idea. She came back up 2 months later and is ready to do this process. And so I'm going to urge Tyson and Tom to funnel all of the necessary information to Kathy so that she can pass it along to you and you can do whatever you can to help move those efforts on a quicker pace.
Yeah, well, no, from what I just learned here.
Correct.
I mean, this is something that's decided at the, what is the headquarters, that was the one that was at headquarters, not assistant secretary level, right? The authorization issue regarding the potential for that.
Correct, sir. It's going to be a full-blown installation.
See, the problem with that project, talking to Jane, who is in order for her to get the necessary investment for this pilot project, it needs to be a full-blown mission to try to move as much sand as possible.
There would
Second,
still be, it wouldn't impede navigation.
no.
No.
Well,
Okay.
All right, I just want to add one thing. Where the rub came was not in the project, but that part of it would be in the channel. And if you know, we were to dredge, or the Army Corps were to dredge, we'd have a real problem with trying to take that out of there. It would probably just, but that's where we would never be able to come to a grip. Would it destroy our project? You know, could it be something surmounted? So that's where we need to work with the Army Corps and her.
I understand that.
The bottom line, at the end of the day, the reason the 408 process is there is to make sure that any modification made to that federal project still allows that federal project to achieve its authorized purpose. And that's why it has to be that level of approval. It all goes back to ensuring that we're able to meet that authorized purpose, which would be to have that channel.
Understood. Also, I appreciate your efforts with regards to the RAMP Act and trying to get these harbor maintenance trust funds. But I couldn't stress enough that once that's done, the real focus that needs to happen with that is the funding formulas that I talked to Colonel Eisenhower last time. The funding formulas have to change with regards to the tonnage. And that's what's so important, I believe, by having these port coalitions, is they just don't, I mean, you saw the presentation today. Even between our 3 different ports, it's very different. You have charter fishing that brings in 51% of the salmon through the sport fishing, through Brookings, where the Port of Port Orford brings in a heck of a lot of crab, more than anyone else. So so when you're looking at the formulas, they must change in order to fund each one of our ports individually. So
Yeah, well, and I believe that, I'm sure that we heard from Senator Merkley's staff, and I'm well aware of that too. There's a guy named Tim Bishop from New York who's going to be the senior Democrat on that subcommittee as we go through the word process, and he's working on how we would have an allocation dedicated to small ports and the standards there, and I'm working with Tim on that. And he represents an inland, I don't call them inland, Great Lakes port, you know. So,
correct.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my point is even with those
not Great Lakes, he's Long Island. Anyway, whatever.
even with the allocation to small ports, you can see the discrepancies and the differences between just these 3 small ports here.
Right.
And so there needs to be a funding formulas all the way down to the basic small port level, such as Port Orford.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's what I try to describe it is, if we're successful, and I think the case we can make to the bigger ports who are advantaged by the current formula is that there's a higher likelihood of success if we have an even bigger coalition, and the bigger coalition would include the values of the small ports and the needs of the small ports, including sport fishing, commercial fishing, but where we're not meeting the other higher criteria for tonnage. That's exactly what.
Thank you.
My name's Chris Aiello. I'm a Port Orford fisherman, member of Port Ocean Resource Team, board member. In that, I just would like to highlight one of our major problems, because the situation in Port Orford's dredging is really time sensitive. If we don't come up with an adaptive way of taking some of the money that was dedicated up to 2 and 3 years, 4 years ago to what might be spent this coming summer, and redefine how that can be spent, as opposed to sediment removal, and it has to be spent on that, as opposed to taking some of that money and building some infrastructure that would be Port Orford specific to maintain dredging at least through the years where you don't get federal dredging or even a state solution that comes in there. That's time sensitive for us. I hate to be divisive in this group that we have here, but Port Orford's number 1 on that list. We risk our lives every day in our cruise lives tying up to that dock. You should come down there and take the beating we do. My knees shake just like I'm shaking now, because I'm in that situation. The other thing is, this whole philosophical battle we're having about spending federal money and state money to support the social good is really killing this country. We've got to put the ideology aside and somehow figure out a way to sunset into the 21st century with some of these solutions, which, because of the bureaucratic process, is not being considered in a timely manner. We need some solution by next summer. This has got to change now. You have to work on this now. So I suggest you gentlemen get to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick, you want
Yeah, thank you all for coming here. Good to see all of our representatives being engaged here in this really important issue. And that's what I want to talk about.
to might tell everybody, some people might not know.
Okay,
who you
Rick
are.
Gaucher, sorry about that. Rick Gaucher, I'm Port Abandon Commissioner. I'm Chairman of the Oregon Albacore Commission. I'm a representative on the Southern Oregon Ocean Resource Coalition. And I guess what I want to say here is, what I want to convey is the sense of urgency on this. Just like Chris was talking about, they need a solution now. The rest of the Gang of Five, we need a solution shortly thereafter, because it's not just a matter of livelihood to us, commercial fishermen. It's a matter of life and death. And in a few years, absent dredging, the conventional dredging that we've been getting in the channels, not in the basins, but in the channels, in a matter of a couple of years, we're going to start seeing people die. Because fishing is what we do. Crossing those bars is what we do. We have to do that. That's how we make our living. As it gets more dangerous, we have to push a little harder and a little harder. And you know, it feels like the commercial fishing industry can't seem to catch a break. You know, we spend most of our time trying to fight for equity of our traditional grounds, you know, marine reserves and ocean energy industrial installations. And now here we're fighting for the very access to those grounds. And we've gone through so many regulatory issues over the years that we feel like, at least I can say, I feel like we're at our wits' end. Now, we've just had a couple of really good years. Albacore has been saving a lot of salmon boats, including myself. So once again, I want to convey a sense of urgency here. We can't just let the other priorities build on top, and all of the cliffs and whatever budget considerations we've got going nationally. This is something that whatever we need to do in the fishing community to help keep it at the top of the list, let us know. We'll be there.
All right, thanks, Rick. Okay, go ahead, and then we'll call into the questions or comments.
Thank you. Bob Forsyth, I'm the port manager with the Port of Siuslaw. Ours is a little different in that our port is about 5 miles inland, upriver, from the mouth of the Siuslaw River. And the last survey that the Corps did for us, very accurate. They've been very good about dredging when they can. But their comments to us were a little bit different in that they said that they could pretty much come in every month and dredge, and it's not really going to change. And the reason that it's not going to change is not so much the dredging and the silting process, but we've lost 475 feet of jetties. And so you can continue to dredge, and we can talk about dredging, but until we look at some of the jetties that are deteriorating around our state, up and down the coast, which is really, really expensive, I understand that, or other alternative materials to build those jetties, what have you, then we're going to be, then we're getting into really, really big money. But we really need to, the Coast Guard, the concern I have is that the Coast Guard, last meeting I had with them, just put us on the top list of the most dangerous jetty on the Oregon coast. So pretty severe for us, stops crossings on a daily basis. And so until we start looking at some of the jetties we're going to have some real high financial issues. And thank you for your support.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Well, thanks for those comments. Just to reflect on what Bob just said, I mean, you know, look, I don't think there's any better way to recover this economy, put Americans back to work, than investing in our infrastructure, and that goes to roads, bridges, highways, jetties, you know, dams, everything else. I mean, the dams on the Willamette River are under capacity for flood control because the Corps can't afford to replace the floodgates. You know, they're having to do it bit by bit by bit by bit, the spillways, and because they don't have the budget. They could do it cheaper and faster, but they have to parcel it out. The same thing with our jetties. I mean, Coos Bay's got problems with jetty, Columbia's got problems with their jetty, got problems down here with jetties. I mean, these were investments that we made nationally, and we need to keep them up, and if they go to failure, then it's a hell of a lot more expensive to rebuild them if they're totally failed, as opposed to doing maintenance and patching them in an adequate way. So I couldn't agree with you more. So that's you know, an ongoing fight over the difference between investment and spending, which a lot of my colleagues don't seem to understand. That's investment. Spending is something that's here today, gone tomorrow, and the jetty's there for a while, and it supports economic activity. I think, I mean, I learned some things here today, learned about some potential for 21st century solutions, learned about growing partnerships. I think we started a little bit of discussion across here and exchanged some ideas at PNWA here, hearing about some of the things that maybe are going on down in South Carolina, reflecting back on the state and how much they can step up, or maybe we even want to start looking at a partnership with Washington State on some of these things, you know, or Northern California in terms of getting more operating days. You know, those sort of things I think are some potential solutions. We've got different issues between bar crossings and harbor siltation. And Port Orford is sort of the poster child for this. I mean, they did the great video, which I've tried to bring to the attention of the highest authorities in the Corps in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's kind of sad, but it was also a pretty cool thing the community did there, have everybody out there and then have them, you know, basically using wheelbarrows to try and deal with a community problem, which they can't do. You know, this has been helpful to me. It will help inform my debate, help me work with the state and PNWA and the other organizations involved, the other groups, and you know, you're gonna just go back and plug away and try and come to some harder objectives after this meeting of some things that we want to set up there and say these are things we're going to work toward. Did you want to? You're acting like you want to comment. Go ahead.
You can just tell, couldn't you?
Yeah, you're leaning out there.
Over all the years in Gold Beach, you know, the people I trained and mentored under in the 40s were action-oriented people, and I see the commercial fishermen, and I do know these people as they come up. And the last guy that became very emotional, I appeared that he left because he was quite emotional, in Port Orford. I do have a business in Port Orford, actually Business of the Year this year, so I'm involved in Port Orford and all the different ports. The problem he's presenting needs an immediate solution. You know, we're all talking bureaucracy and permits and streamlining and all the processes. You know, in the old days, I got to go back to that. You know, we would take a group of people. I would probably grab Ted right here. I see John Knutson there. I'd grab him. I'd grab Reg Poland back there in the back of the room. I'd probably pull Jeff in for cover with the government. The reason I used to mentor with Bob Van Leer was I'd keep the press on my side. And what I would do then is I would grab these people, and I already know the solution. I've already told the port manager and the port people there, you know, the prop wash thing is a great idea, but it's not going to work at Port Orford. I've got 40 years experience in prop wash dredging extensively on the Rogue River. They need a pipeline dredge, they need a DEQ spoils area approved, they need a CAT in there building the area, they need a pipeline mobilized, and they need to start pipelining that sand out of there. And I agree, the 408 study and all that, the sand's going to keep coming back. There's a problem with when the old timers were sitting on that dock, which was the piling dock, and as the water washed through it, they were talking about the new project and how it wasn't going to flush. These were the old fishermen down there that were older than that guy, and apparently they might have been right, and so now it's not flushing. So, you know, the studies you do at Vicksburg or wherever the Army Corps does is there's probably a design deficiency somewhere, but the immediate solution is just to keep pipelining the thing until, you know, because those guys are, you saw that low tide pitch, it's just incredibly dangerous there. And so the immediate solution is just to go in and fix it now. And when pipelines have trouble in this rough ocean, you'll obviously have to have weather concerns or what, and you know, the Aquina, I don't think can go in there and do any of that type of work. I don't think, so I think you as the Army, or a clamshell, or the clamshell and the barge like you brought to the Coast Guard. I was pretty impressed with that process, that barge you brought up. or the clamshell barge that came in to do our Gold Beach Coast Guard a few years ago. But these things require immediate solutions now, and the bureaucracy and the streamlining and all this talk is nice, but
Right, well,
you
we're
know.
not just talking, I mean, that's
Yeah.
why I wanted to have this meeting, and that's why we didn't have a quiet meeting in the back room somewhere.
Correct,
We-
correct. But that's why this 5 ports group is to grab a problem
Right.
and immediately grab a solution.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Anybody else who's up here want to reflect? Jeff?
Just a thought, I really appreciate the fact that these ports are getting together, and this is way out of the box, and I'm probably an idiot for saying this.
Now,
but-
remember, we already heard earlier there shouldn't be a box at all. So.
I know. And I don't like boxes unless I'm picking cantaloupes and have something to put them in. But I'm just wondering, the Corps has their tonnage standard, and none of our small ports make it. What if they became an association and they aggregated their tonnage and met the standard? Just a thought.
Oh, they could all become affiliated with Coos Bay, see, and then we become a dispersed mid-sized port on the Oregon coast. I think we'd have, but yeah, it's okay. Thanks very much. Appreciate everybody being here. Appreciate all the questions. So thank you. Appreciate your time.